Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and I've got my trusty sidekick, Jeff Rutt, with us today. Say hello to the people, Jeff.
Hello to the people.
And we have a very special guest with us today, Steve Woodworth. Now, Steve is the CEO of Masterworks, which is a marketing agency, specializes in working with all kinds of nonprofits and this sort of thing. We're going to hear all about it. But first of all, Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff. Good to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. Steve, we always kind of try to start with a backstory. So, Jeff, I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, Steve, tell us about what it was like growing up in the Woodworth family. Any fun junior high or high school stories? Foundation of your faith. What was it like growing up in that household in the early years?
Well, it was not a Christian household. It was my mom was kind of a cultural Catholic, so grew up in the Catholic Church until I was 12. My mom got divorced and remarried, and back in those days, before Vatican II, you were excommunicated for remarriage. So why go to church anymore was kind of her reasoning. So we stopped going to church, and then she found the Lord years later when I was out of the home. And my wife and I went back to visit her, and we had just been married a year, and she led us both to Christ on the same day.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, she went to a Navigators Bible study and found the Lord. And I told that story to Jerry White, longtime leader of the Navigators, and he said, I've never heard a story where the husband and wife listened to the gospel together and decided together to follow Jesus.
Praise God. That's amazing.
But the household was crazy, wild. My mom was married 3 times, and my dad was married 5 times. And so there were 8 marriages between my parents in total. Wow. And I had a lot of different households, moved on average more than once a year. So it's just kind of a wild and not so functioning household.
Wow.
That's a wonderful story.
I can relate to that in so many levels. But Steve, any fun stories amidst the dysfunction there growing up for you as you were going through school?
Well, I did well in school, did real well in school despite all that, and didn't have to study very much. I was, I guess, one of my most exciting moments in my high school career was my high school years was I broke my wrist skiing. And I was going to a brand new high school, just one of those transitions. I'd gone to live with my dad after living with my mom. So it was my first year in this high school. I didn't know anybody, but except a couple ski buddies. And I was a sophomore, and they had a math test for the whole school. And I came in second. And of course, number 1 was a senior, and being a sophomore and coming in number 2, everybody was talking about who's the guy who came in number 2 on this math test, a nationwide kind of SAT style math test. And it spread through the school. It's the kid with the cast on his wrist. So I went from being completely unknown to being kind of a celebrity there, and just from one event there. And I had a great time there. Unfortunately, we moved again a year later, but that was my favorite year of high school.
Wow. Where were you skiing?
Mount Hood in Oregon.
Mount Hood. Okay, Oregon. Okay, that's some real skiing out there.
Yeah, it's a great place to ski.
That's awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So take us then. So it sounds like you moved around a lot, but you landed where'd you land in college?
Seattle. I was born in Seattle, moved to Chicago, then moved to Portland, then moved back to Seattle. Finished out my last year of high school here in Seattle, went to the University of Washington.
Okay. And then tell us about those years when you met your wife. What led you to those early career decisions?
Well, met my wife through mutual friends. Again, I moved here, knew nobody. I'm still in Seattle now. We moved back here after some years in LA. Um, and I lived on the border of a school district that some friends were in a 4-H club with my wife, and she lived on the other side of the border, so she went to a different high school. But through these mutual friends, we met, and within, gosh, I don't know, within the first year or so, we were talking about getting married, and got married at 20 and 19. So
What were
early
you
on.
doing? What was the 4-H activity?
She raised, gosh, all kinds of animals. But mostly she was into horseback riding.
Okay.
Showing she had horses. She lived on a 20-acre little gentleman farm that her dad had. He was a civil engineer who wanted to be a cowboy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
And then what was the first, what did you study in school, Steve?
Well, I started out in pre-med because of the sort of math and science
Yeah.
that came really natural to me, but I smoked too much marijuana. That was the early 70s, late 60s hippie movement, grew my hair out long, and the marijuana just took away all motivation. That's what worries me about this current generation where it's
Uh,
legal in so many states. I would say I had no achievement motivation, and I made that up. I don't even know if that's a scientific proven thing or not, but I just lost any will to study or to get good grades or anything. And I was getting like a 3.9 in my first 2 years of college, and then I hit organic chemistry, which is like learning a new language. I mean, I could only compare it to I went to Fuller Seminary for 1 semester and took Greek, and you got to study and you got to memorize like crazy. And I
Mhm.
wasn't doing that. So I bombed out of organic chemistry, and my advisor told me, you're not going to get into med school. You need to pick a different major. And I picked business, and because I had taken economics class as an elective, and I just found it fascinating. And I'm so glad I got in business, and I'm glad I'm not a doctor. I don't think I would have enjoyed being a doctor, and my business degree ended up leading to my ministry career.
How old were you when you became a believer? When your mom and dad, or was it a
20,
stepfather at that point?
yeah,
Sure.
no, it was my mom. I was 21.
Yeah.
My mom did not come to our wedding because she had agoraphobia and she just couldn't travel at all.
Wow.
So a year after Trisha and I got married, we drove from Seattle to Kansas City to see my mom. And on the way out there, I even said to Trisha, I hope my mom doesn't preach at us the whole time, because she was writing me letters about Jesus. And with the very first day, we went for a walk in the park, and I said, tell me about Jesus Christ. And I don't remember saying that. And they
Yeah.
both swore that I said it. And that's how the conversation started. And I think that was just the sovereignty of God moving my mouth and opening the door for her to share the gospel. She was praying that she would have an opportunity, a natural opportunity to share.
Amazing. And did your wife come around soon thereafter, or how did that?
Same
Same
day?
day. Yeah.
Same
We
day.
talked about it that night. We talked about Jesus all day. And then when we went to bed, I said, what do you think about following Jesus? She was into an Eastern guru cult, and I was into science. I was still in my pre-med. And we just decided together, yeah, let's get together on this, because I'm not going to follow your guru, and you're searching for spirituality. And she said, I think I've been searching for Jesus. And I said, okay, well,
Wow.
my Catholic upbringing kind of came back to me that I believe in God. I believe there is a God, and this all makes sense, that if there was, that something like this would have happened. The story of Jesus just totally made sense to me. And I read Chuck Colson's book, Born Again, that day while
Wow.
my mom and my wife were talking, and I just in bed at night at the end of a long day of talking about Jesus, we both decided, yeah, let's follow him together.
That's crazy, man.
That's
I love
awesome.
it. That gives hope to a lot of praying parents out there, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, hey, okay, so what's the first job after school?
My first job after school was really World Vision. I mean, I was working in hardware stores to get through school, but when I finished college, I started to go for the kind of normal interviews you do when you get a business degree,
Right.
and I felt Tricia and I started talking about it. We both felt called to go to the mission field, and we didn't even know what that meant, but we felt like we'd been so radically transformed. The marijuana and drugs and all that just went away. I mean, God just delivered us from that, and we were forgiven much and we loved much, and so we decided we wanted to go to the mission field. Our pastor told us, you don't know the Bible. You got to know the Bible before you can be a missionary. And because I have my business degree, I went to started looking around seminaries, chose Fuller. We moved to Los Angeles and went there for one semester, and could not make enough money with her waitressing and me working part-time to pay the tuition at Fuller. We could live, but we couldn't live and
Yeah.
pay the tuition. So I realized we're going to be $20,000 in debt trying to be missionaries. That's just not going to work. Had our first real crisis of faith and went to see our pastor of the church we chose to go to down there. And he told me about World Vision. It was right down the road from Fuller at that time in the LA area. I walked in the front door and filled out an application, and I got hired. And 7 or so years later, I was in charge of all the marketing for the US, and just an amazing story of God using me. And it was going back to those math skills. I was doing analytics on a treasure trove of data that World Vision had on their mainframe computer that they'd never really mined, and they'd never had anybody working on it full time. And we had one breakthrough after another from just doing analytics on response to television shows and things like that.
So you were doing big data before that was popular.
Yeah, I guess you could call it big data. It was expensive too. In order to actually do anything, you had to run it through a service bureau, and you paid for by the minute for how much data you processed and
Working the punch cards.
Well, no, it wasn't punch cards. It was big reels of
Oh yeah,
tape.
yeah. That's amazing. Because I was going to ask. I mean, it wasn't intuitive to me how the math kid became the marketing guy, but that really explains that transition. And so, I mean, this led to a whole career that puts you on a whole new trajectory. So it sounds like you really sort of enjoyed that data mining.
Yeah, I did, and I was good at it. And I had bosses that were really smart at asking the right questions. Like, we had a mental model, because the only other nonprofit doing fundraising through television was the Jerry Lewis Telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and so we had a mental model that we could only air a program once a year in any given city. So we'd buy time in Chicago for one airing, and then we'd wait a year and come back and air another airing. We weren't doing telethons, we were doing more documentary style. And my boss had the idea of looking at, is that really true or not? Because sometimes we would often get extra deals. We'd get stations coming back to us and saying, hey, we want to sell you some more time, we'll give you a discount. And we had never analyzed, or World Vision had never thought to analyze, does the number of time, the amount of time you wait between airings make a difference? It turned out when I analyzed the data, there was no correlation between response and how long it had been since the previous airing. So then we did some in-market testing where we bought time every week on the same station at the same time, and we saw no decline in response.
Wow.
Which that just fundamentally, as you can imagine, we doubled our spend in television from one year to the next, and had a huge inflection point of growth as a result, because the results held up. And those are the kind of things I did. And then I got bored just doing analysis. So they started giving me responsibility for some of the marketing programs, the child sponsorship, fundraising, and things like that. And then I ultimately got promoted to be VP of marketing. So I was in charge of all the marketing for the US.
And at some point you decided to go out and start your own agency. What was that transition like?
Well, I went all over the world, and I had a great career there. And I just was struggling with issues at the time that World Vision was dealing with. I thought the overhead was too high, I thought. And I was wrestling with the CEO, who didn't agree and didn't want me spending time on that. And we were cutting millions of dollars out of the overhead. I just realized I was kind of at loggerheads with him. I was almost like in a rebellion, and I needed to do like David did, and refuse to fight against the person who God had put in authority. And so I decided I would leave, and if God wanted me to come back, I'd be back. And so I did. I left, and and I have done work for World Vision, but I never did go back. We reconciled, by the way. Just there's a happy ending to that story. The president 5 years later asked me to come back, and even offered me more responsibility. And I was already getting a lot of traction at this agency, and I saw that I could help a lot of organizations instead of just focusing on one. But we had a good run the whole time I was there at World Vision. We were growing by double-digit percentages every year because of this, this heavy emphasis on innovation and analysis and data. And then I brought that into other organizations that weren't doing anything like that at that time.
What year did you start the business, Masterworks?
I didn't actually found it. It was founded by a guy who had left another agency who had left the agency. So 3 generations removed from the agency that I had working for me at World Vision. And he started it in 1989 and I joined it in 1992. So it was still relatively new and small. And he told me that he wanted to sell it. He wanted to retire, and so he would just figure maybe 5 years when I knew the business well enough to totally take it over, and he could be comfortable that I could pay him. Then he would retire. Well, he ended up doing it in 4 years. We had a really good partnership, and he kept his promise, and so he sold it to me in '96.
And now you've written a book called Lost in Transition: Lessons from the Most Disastrous and Successful Ministry Successions. That's interesting. When did that sort of come into the picture? Was that sort of later as you started thinking about your transition?
No, actually, I started thinking about it before I ever was thinking about my own transition. I had been in this agency for 25 years or so, and I had witnessed a lot of really bad ministry leadership successions. I was right in the middle of some of them in knowing the details of the situation. And I thought that the things that were going wrong were easily preventable. And in some cases, it was a matter of just better communication, or it was a matter of a board just not knowing what they don't know, things like that. These are all things I talk about in the book, but I also saw some really good ones. And so one of my partners was urging me to write a book that he did some research. He didn't see any books out there on this subject for Christian organizations. There were for pastors, but not for parachurch ministries. And I just thought, I don't know, I'll ever get around to it. I don't know if I really have a book in me. And then Bill High, the founder of the Signatory, I was talking to him about this one day, and he said, "Steve, you need to write that book. I don't think there's anything like that out there. And every year that you don't write it, there's going to be some successions that go poorly that could have gone well." And that just struck me right in the heart.
That
I
sounds
decided,
like Bill.
yeah, I
Great
just decided
encouragement.
I need to get serious about it. And I put a fleece out there. I thought the best succession that I had seen up close and personally was Rich Stearns to Edgar Sandoval at World Vision. That was years after I was there. That was just 5, 6, 7 years ago. And so I asked Rich what he thought, and he was all for it. And I asked him if he'd help me, and he said yes, he would. He'd be all in. And then one of the more troubling ones I'd watched was at Focus on the Family with Dr. Dobson left and started another organization. And so there was not a happy, easy transition there. And so I asked Jim Daly, the successor to Dr. Dobson, if he would help me, and he was all for it too, and said yes, he would help me. So when those two guys were enthusiastic about it, I decided to go ahead and do it. And I ended up interviewing a couple dozen CEOs, incoming and outgoing, some board members, a few pastors and others, to take the principles that I had come up with. At the time, I had 4 key principles I thought that were necessary for a good succession, and differentiated the good from the bad. And I added a 5th. So I ended up, the book has 5 principles to follow that can lead to good succession, and if not followed, can lead to even disastrous successions where the
I know
ministry
that
loses a lot of money.
I know that could fill an entire podcast, but do you mind giving us just a cursory flyby of the 5? I know
I'll be
intrigued. I
happy
am.
to. Yeah, I'll try to do it fast. If you want me to go into any more
Yeah,
detail,
we'll
you
do.
can ask me. Yeah. Well, first of all, boards don't realize that they don't know enough to choose a CEO. They know it's their most important responsibility, so they think they should be able to do it, and they really can't do it because they don't have enough information. They need to involve the senior staff. Like in Rich Stern's case at World Vision, the board let him help write the job description all the way through to interviewing the final candidates and advocating for the one that he thought was the best. The second principle is that the culture is a huge part of whether it's successful or not. You need to have a good culture fit, and that's really hard when you're hiring from outside. So I'm a strong proponent of hiring from inside and grooming someone to be your successor. The third one is to respect the outgoing CEO. The outgoing CEO has an awful lot of goodwill and wisdom, and when they feel disrespected, they can tear down the pillars, if they want to.
Great point.
Or just the lack of support can cause you to lose customers, donors, whatever. So respecting that outgoing person. The fourth principle is everybody being humble. It's really an emotionally charged situation to give up something that you've been running for a long time to somebody else. It's very hard. And this is something I'm learning more and more now as I'm working on my own succession. I've chosen my successor. He's read the book. He's in the book. And so we're really working hard to do everything right. And I'm realizing I have to continually humble myself, let him make decisions, for example, even if I might not agree with it, he's got to learn somehow. And he'll only learn if I'm humble enough to stay out of his way, which leads to the last principle, which is clear and frequent communication.
Yeah.
We keep very close accounts. We don't even let a day go by if something bugs one or the other of us. And one time I lost sleep at night over something that I thought he was deciding that I thought violated my values. And he told me, I don't care if it's 10 or 11 o'clock at night, call me if this ever happens again. Don't wait until the next morning and lose sleep over it.
So it sounds to me like, man, those are money as far as I'm concerned. And it sounds like those are, now you've used those principles in your for-profit business, right? So maybe, I know we were talking before we started recording about the transition that you're working on. And so maybe it's a bit of a step back to tell us about the arc of the business. And I know you're looking to give a piece of it away and that sort of thing. So maybe talk about your journey as a generous business owner, if you will.
Yeah, well, I started out the first thing that happened. Ironically, I know you guys are affiliated with Alan Barnhart. I've never met him personally, but I was at a generous giving conference that he spoke at. It's got to be 20 years ago, and the people that they had up there were all people who were giving away their whole business, and I was a bit offended. I thought, what about somebody like me who can't afford to do that? And then years later, we had the opportunity to buy the building that we were in, and our broker who was looking around for office space for us showed us on paper how buying the building was by far and away the smartest thing to do, not leasing something. And I could barely scrape together the down payment. And when my attorney and my consultant that worked with me, who is an expert on marketing agencies, when they heard that I didn't have enough money, my wife and I were being generous. We were giving away our profit every year, and they both urged me to start saving money. That you've got to be independent from the business, and you've also got to be able to back up your business. So you've got to have some significant savings. As the company gets bigger, it'll be more and more reliant on you, and someday it won't be, but at this stage of my life, I was in my 40s, and they were urging me to be a little less generous, honestly, and a little more deliberate about saving. And so I was doing that, and then I found out that I actually could give privately held stock. I met Kendra Vandermeulen, who at the time was the president of National Christian Foundation Seattle, and she explained to me the whole idea of being able to give away privately held stock, and then you can wait a time period and through, if you do it right, you can buy it back. And then that money goes into the kingdom and you give it away out of a donor advised fund. So we did that, my wife and I. And and that led to a point at which I met Bill High and the founder of Signatry, and Bill started walking me down a journey of thinking about what would God have me do with the business, especially since it was focused on Christian ministries. And he introduced me to David Green, the founder of Hobby Lobby. I was going to be in Oklahoma City, and he said, would you want to meet David? And I was like, oh wow, yeah, it'd be kind of like meeting the Pope. Like, I don't even know how to act. And I spent almost 2 hours with David on a Friday afternoon, and he told me his own story about what a relief it was to him to give away Hobby Lobby into a trust and have the profits go to the kingdom. And I walked away kind of scratching my head, like I didn't think that we could do that. And honestly, I also knew that my company had grown many times the size of what it was when I got here. And I knew we had enough net worth that we'd never run out of money. So I had never done a financial plan. So I talked to Tricia about it. We decided to get a financial advisor and do a financial plan and figure out how much of it could we afford to give away. And the answer came back, we could afford to give the whole company away.
Wow.
Which we started then seriously thinking and praying about that. It took this journey took probably 2 years from the time I met David and he planted that idea till we got a financial plan, till we decided to give it away. And the interesting thing is the day that we decided we thought we should give it away and we felt like that's what God was calling us to do, I remembered that, wait a minute, when we started out, we felt called to be missionaries, which led to World Vision, which led to my marketing expertise, which led to a marketing company, which grew into a, sizable 130 person operation. And this feels like going full circle back to being missionaries. We didn't set out to build a business, and let's give it back to God. And furthermore, let's put it into a structure in which it will stay focused on Christian organizations, because that's our area of expertise, and that's deeply satisfying to me. And I know that those kind of missional companies rarely make it to the next generation, keeping the same mission. And so, yeah, we're just thrilled to do that. We've started the process already, given away 20% of it and intending to give away all of it.
Yeah, I love the arc of that, because as we were talking before we started recording, I tell people the Barnhart story a lot of times to just kind of break their brains, as we like to say around here. Of when I heard, maybe we were at the same conference, because I heard him about 20 years ago, and I was just my goal in life was to be a tickled tither, and he tells me about this thing, and I'm going, holy smokes! It just changed the way I thought. And same thing, we've given 20% of Arcos away so far, and we're on that train, God willing, to continue to do more. And it was the same thing, but it wasn't until 2019 that we were able to do the first chunk. And so you just never know what seeds might sprout, and it doesn't have to look the same for everybody, so I just love it that you kind of had a similar experience, but you've also gone through this transition of leadership. What is your day-to-day involvement in the business now, Steve?
I'm still the CEO, and Brian, my successor, is president. So everyone reports up into Brian, and we're on a journey where I'm just giving him more and more responsibility. He's I made him COO first, and he did that for a year, and then has been president for 2 years. And when he was COO, I kept finance and new business reporting to me. And all along the way, Brian has just, I've told him multiple times, you've exceeded my expectations every month. Just his ability to take us to the next level. He came in as the VP of digital marketing, and that was the cutting edge of what we're doing. And he's taken us to I believe, the market leadership in that whole area. to where we now acquire more donors online for our clients than we do through any other channel. And that has happened really fast. And that's not true for most organizations these days, not yet. And so he has a technology background and is just a really good leader and manager. And I've been delighted to work with him and his value system. He came out of a really intense business where they had to meet their numbers every month. And he had to report into New York City. And if he hadn't met his numbers, he had to lay some people off. And it was month to month, grinding out like that. And he didn't know how to manage a company relationally. And I came from a ministry background through World Vision. So I was more oriented to loving the people and building the people and being really reluctant to lay people off. Traditional agency businesses, every time you lose a client, you lay some people off. And we tried not to do that and have done it only on rare occasions. And he got the vision for that. He has a ministry heart. He has an MDiv, and he's been a worship pastor on and off while he would be in the business world in the day to day. And he's just makes good decisions. He doesn't make all the decisions I would make, but I've let him make decisions even when I thought he was making a mistake. And sometimes he was making a mistake, but it's nothing fatal. And it's just been a great partnership, and we really appreciate each other and get along well.
Some of these are selfish questions because I'm on this journey with you, and you're a few years ahead of me. But I hope it's helpful to other people running on the treadmill listening to this. But so as you progress for the rest of your life, what do you hope your relationship looks like from the company? Do you expect some just regular cash flow to pay your bills? And then also, who is helping give away the profits when you make a distribution?
So both of those are major questions.
Yeah.
The rest of my life, what it looks like to me is because our clients are ministries, I feel that my whatever I do can fit under Masterworks as far as what I can do for the kingdom. I've been volunteering with the Lausanne movement for nearly 20 years now. I led the communications for the Lausanne Congress in Cape Town in 2010 as a second full-time job as a volunteer. And I continue to chair the communications working group through this Congress that just happened in Seoul, Korea a few months ago. And continue to mentor some people within the Lausanne team. And I'm good friends with the CEO, Michael O, and give him counsel as he wants and needs it. And so I feel like there's things like that. You know, there are clients that I'm good friends with. I get called occasionally to speak to a board because the board is not making a good decision. And I've had a few things like that with the succession book that has come out. I've had several CEOs ask me, will you talk to my board chair because they're messing it up, and I'm really frustrated. And I've had one real success story so far that would have been a disaster. They were there was a board that refused to consider a founder's daughter as a successor, just because this was a business minded board, and we just don't do that, you know. And yet it made total sense to do so. And
interesting.
Yeah, so I talked to the board and talked to the board chair multiple times along the way, and they ultimately chose the daughter, and she's doing great. And so that so you asked me, like, what am I expecting from the business? I don't really know. I'm 68. And I still have the energy to work full time, so I still am. I'm also in a really good partnership with Brian, where we're getting along well, and I'm supporting him, and so it kind of depends on what Brian wants and whether I want to start spending less time. I imagine I'll go to part-time at some point, and I will also not be in Brian's way. So if we get to a point where there's confusion among staff or clients or whatever, I'll do whatever I need to make it clear. I don't want to just retire, though I don't believe retirement's biblical. I'm sure you probably thought
Oh
a lot
yeah,
about
but
that
you'll
yourself.
do something, but it doesn't have to be full-time in that business. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't have to be, but because the business focuses on Christian
Yeah,
organizations,
it's so ministry focused. It's a pretty good platform for you.
yeah, it is. I can't imagine a better platform. I
Right.
can't imagine.
Exactly.
We have a new senior pastor, and I went to him recently and said, each of our senior pastors, I wanted to get permission that I'm not an elder, and I don't want to stand for being an elder for being picked, because I travel too much. I tried it once and it didn't work out. I was traveling too much, and I just want your blessing. And I explained to him the things that I was doing with
Yeah.
Masterworks and with the Lausanne movement and a board I'm on,
Yeah.
A3 ministry called A3, a leadership development ministry. And he said that our church is called Gateway. He said that is Gateway. That if you were to ask me, what can I do to further the mission of Gateway, I would say, do that.
Right. The whole point is to be pumped up to send them out, right? You're already out. So
Yeah.
keep being
Yeah.
out. Well,
Yeah, I had his enthusiastic blessing. Keep doing what you're doing.
yeah. Well, I could talk about this forever because I really relate to the journey you're on, and I know I have a lot to learn from you, but I know we have to kind of move toward a wrap. And so as we kind of wrap up, Steve, what we always ask at the end is just some wisdom, maybe a practical tip for somebody behind you on the journey, somebody maybe in the middle of their career who would really like to kind of combine their sort of ministry with their work. This is called the generous business owner. So we're trying to kind of encourage people down that path. What would be just a practical tip for somebody on that journey?
I was able to dig out of where I was. We always felt like we should just keep giving a higher and higher percentage. So we were pushing up to 10, way beyond 10, 20, 30%. But we decided that didn't really take a lot of faith. If the business dropped, we just dropped our giving. And and so the commitment to do a donor advised fund stock gift was a serious step forward in faith for us, because it meant we were committing to giving at a certain level for years to come. And when the business would go down, we would give out of assets. And that was a good thing for us. I think it just stretched our generosity muscles quite a bit. But at the same time, I would say that the possibility of giving away part of your company or all of your company does require you to build wealth on the side. And so you need to be doing that at the same time too. I was late in getting started on that. And so there's nothing wrong with building a cushion of wealth for potential retirement or whatever, whatever might happen. We just don't know. Is a good thing to do at the same time as you're being generous and giving.
To your point, I know Jeff Rudd always tells the story about when his family announced to the leadership of his company that they had given away 89% of the business to the foundation. One of his managers came up to him and said, "Hey, welcome to the club. You're one of us now." In other words, you just work here too. And that's sort of the way I look at it. Is I'm just an employee of God's company. That's right. I contribute to the 401k and just like everybody else, and get my match. And I pray that's enough if I'm not able to work or they don't want me around anymore to live on that. So it sounds like, so I actually like that encouragement that it's okay to do a little bit of a combo,
Yeah.
So, well, that's great. I love that. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your story with us today. It's really been a pleasure.
My pleasure too, Jeff.
And thanks everybody for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.